The phone call that changed everything. Blake Morrison stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan office, watching the city lights twinkle like scattered diamonds across the skyline. At 34, he had built an empire in fertility medicine. His clinic on the Upper East Side catered to celebrities and millionaires desperate for children. Tonight, like most nights, he was working late, reviewing patient files and research papers. His phone buzzed against the mahogany desk, displaying an unknown number. Blake normally ignored such calls, but something made him answer. Dr. Morrison speaking. Blake, it's Jasmine. The voice hit him like a wave of nostalgia. Jasmine Reed. They had been inseparable during medical school at Columbia, staying up all night studying anatomy, grabbing pizza at 3 a.m., dreaming about the lives they would build as doctors. But after graduation, their paths had diverged dramatically. He had pursued the lucrative world of private fertility practice, while she had chosen pediatric nursing at a public hospital in Queens. Jasmine. Wow, it's been, 3 years since we really talked? I know. I'm sorry for disappearing like that. Her voice cracked slightly. Blake, I need your help. I'm pregnant, and I'm scared. Blake's professional instincts kicked in immediately. How far along are you? 38 weeks. I'm due any day now. Do you have a doctor? A birth plan? Silence stretched between them before Jasmine spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't have anyone, Blake. The father isn't in the picture. My insurance is terrible. I've been going to a community clinic, but I trust you more than anyone. You're the only doctor I know who actually cares about patients as people, not just cases. Blake felt his heart constrict. Despite their years apart, Jasmine had been his closest friend. The person who had kept him grounded during the brutal years of medical school when he thought he might quit. She had believed in him when he doubted himself. Where are you right now? Home, in Queens. I've been having contractions on and off for the past few hours. Oh. Blake was already grabbing his jacket and car keys. Text me your address. I'm coming to check on you. If you're in labor, we'll get you to my clinic. A friendship remembered the drive from Manhattan to Queens took 45 minutes through late-night traffic. Blake's BMW navigated the streets on autopilot, while his mind raced through memories. Jasmine laughing at his terrible jokes during biochemistry lectures. Jasmine holding his hand when his father died during their second year. Jasmine celebrating with him when he matched into his dream residency program. Why had they drifted apart? Life, he supposed. Different paths, different worlds. He had become consumed by building his practice, by proving himself in a competitive field. She had chosen a quieter path, working with sick children in an understaffed hospital. Her apartment building was modest, 5-story walk-up in a neighborhood that had seen better days. Blake climbed the stairs 2 at a time, his medical bag in hand. When Jasmine opened the door to apartment 3C, he was struck by how different she looked from their last meeting. Her dark curls were pulled back in a messy bun, and her brown skin glowed with the unmistakable radiance of late pregnancy. She wore an oversized sweater and leggings, one hand protectively cradling her swollen belly. But it was her eyes that caught him. Those warm hazel eyes he remembered so well, now filled with exhaustion and worry. Blake. She smiled, but it was strained. You came. Of course I came. Stepped inside, immediately assessing her condition with his trained eye. Let's get you sitting down so I can examine you. The examination Jasmine's apartment was small but cozy, filled with books, plants, and photographs of children, presumably her young patients. Blake cleared space on the worn couch and helped her sit down. Tell me about these contractions, he said, pulling out his stethoscope and blood pressure cuff. They started yesterday morning, but they were far apart. Now they're coming every 10 minutes or so. As if on cue, Jasmine's face tightened with pain. She breathed through it, counting silently. Blake timed the contraction 45 seconds. He checked her vital signs, noting her slightly elevated blood pressure and heart rate. Have you had any bleeding? Discharge? Some discharge this morning. Clear, nothing worrying. Good. Let me check your cervix. Blake maintained his professional demeanor, but inside he felt the weight of responsibility. This wasn't just another patient. This was Jasmine. After the examination, he sat back on his heels. You're at 4 centimeters. Early labor, but progressing. These contractions are going to get stronger and closer together. We should get you to my clinic where I have everything we need for a safe delivery. Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. Blake, I can't afford your clinic. Your patients are movie stars and socialites. I'm a pediatric nurse who can barely make rent. Blake took her hands in his. Jasmine, stop. You're not a patient, you're family. You were there for me when I had nothing. Let me be here for you now. Journeyed to the clinic, they made it to Blake's clinic, just as Jasmine's contractions intensified to every 5 minutes. His night staff, accustomed to late-night emergencies, sprang into action. Within minutes, Jasmine was settled in the luxury birthing suite, a far cry from the standard hospital room she had expected. This is too much, Jasmine protested. Looking around at the warm lighting, comfortable bed, and state-of-the-art monitoring equipment. This is where you deserve to be, Blake countered, helping her into a hospital gown. Now let's focus on bringing your baby into the world safely. As the hours passed, Blake stayed by her side, coaching her breathing, adjusting her position, monitoring her progress. Between contractions, they talked, really talked, for the first time in years. She told him about her work with premature babies, the joy and heartbreak of pediatric nursing. He confessed how empty his success sometimes felt, how he missed having real connections with people. You were always the best of us, Jasmine said during a quiet moment, gripping his hand. Even when we were drowning in student loans and textbooks, you cared about people, not just grades. I learned that from you, Blake replied softly as dawn broke over Manhattan. Painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Jasmine's contractions reached their peak. Blake called in his assisting nurse and prepared for delivery. This is it, he told Jasmine, his voice calm and reassuring. You're going to meet your baby very soon. You're doing amazing. What Blake didn't know was that in the next few moments, everything he thought he knew about his life was about to change forever. The moment of truth, the delivery room hummed with quiet efficiency as dawnlight filtered through the windows of Blake Morrison's pristine clinic. Jasmine's breathing had become rhythmic and focused, each contraction bringing her closer to meeting her child. Blake positioned himself at the foot of the bed, his hands steady despite the unusual nervousness fluttering in his chest. Okay, Jasmine, with the next contraction. I need you to push as hard as you can, Blake instructed, his voice calm and professional. His assisting nurse, Rebecca, stood ready with warm blankets and medical supplies. Jasmine nodded, her face flushed with exertion. Her hands gripped the bed rails as another wave of pain rolled through her body. She pushed with everything she had, her cry echoing in the room. That's perfect. I can see the head now. Dark hair, lots of it, Blake encouraged, his heart racing with anticipation. One more big push, and we'll have the head out completely. The next contraction came quickly. Jasmine bore down, her face contorted with effort. Blake's experienced hands guided the baby's head as it emerged, carefully checking for the umbilical cord. Everything was progressing normally. Heads out. You're doing brilliantly, Jasmine. Just a few more pushes for the shoulders, 2 more contractions, 2 more pushes, and suddenly Blake was holding a squirming, crying newborn in his hands. The baby's lungs filled with air for the first time, announcing his arrival with a healthy, robust cry. It's a boy, Blake announced, his smile automatic. A beautiful, healthy boy. But as he lifted the baby to clear his airways and perform the initial assessment, Blake's words died in his throat. His hands froze mid-motion, and the professional mask he wore cracked completely. The baby's eyes opened briefly, unfocused, but unmistakable in their color. Amber, not brown, not hazel, but true amber, a rare golden brown shade that Blake saw every morning in his own mirror. His grandmother had called them honey eyes, passed down through only a handful of family members across generations. Recognition and denial Blake's. Mind went blank as he stared at the tiny face before him. The baby's nose, even in its newborn state, had a distinctive shape slightly upturned at the tip with flared nostrils. Blake had been self-conscious about that nose as a teenager, until his mother assured him it gave him character. His medical school ID photo still showed that same nose. Blake. Is something wrong? Jasmine's voice cut through his paralysis, edged with panic. Why aren't you saying anything? Is he okay? Blake shook himself, forcing his body to complete the necessary medical procedures. He suctioned the baby's nose and mouth, clamped and cut the umbilical cord, all while his mind raced through impossible calculations. He's perfect, Blake managed to say, though his voice sounded strange to his own ears. 10 fingers, 10 toes, breathing well. Strong cry. He handed the baby to Rebecca for weighing and measuring, needing a moment to compose himself. His hands trembled as he delivered the placenta and checked Jasmine for tears. Everything was automatic. Muscle memory from hundreds of deliveries, because his conscious mind was spiraling. 7 pounds, 6 ounces, Rebecca announced. 20 inches long. APGAR scores are 9 and 9. A very healthy baby boy. When Rebecca brought the cleaned and swaddled infant to Jasmine, Blake forced himself to look again. The baby had settled down, his eyes closed in exhaustion from his journey into the world. But Blake could see more features now. The shape of the ears slightly pointed at the top. The distinctive widow's peak hairline, visible even under the dark downy hair. The small cleft in the chin. Blake had a photograph at home, tucked in an album his mother had given him, showing himself as a newborn. The baby in Jasmine's arms could have been that photograph come to life. Professional composure cracking. He's so beautiful, Jasmine whispered, tears streaming down her face as she gazed at her son. Blake, thank you. Thank you for being here, for helping me bring him into the world safely. Blake pulled up a chair beside the bed, his legs suddenly unsteady. What are you going to name him? Oliver, Jasmine said softly, touching the baby's tiny hand. Oliver James Reed. I've known since the moment I found out I was pregnant. Oliver means peace, and James was my grandfather's name. Oliver, Blake repeated, the name feeling significant in his mouth. It's a strong name. He needed to ask the question burning in his mind. But how? How did you ask your best friend if the baby she just gave birth to might be yours? How did you even begin that conversation? Jasmine looked up at him, and something in her expression made Blake's heart stop. There was knowledge there, and fear, and something else he couldn't quite identify. There's something I need to tell you, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. But before she could continue, Rebecca returned with paperwork. Just need to record some information for the birth certificate. Mother's full name and date of birth I have. Father's information? The silence that followed was deafening. Blake watched Jasmine's face carefully, saw her swallow hard, saw the way her arms tightened protectively around Oliver. I'll need a moment before we fill that out, Jasmine said quietly. Can we have some privacy, please? Rebecca nodded, professional as always, and left the room. The door clicked shut, leaving Blake and Jasmine alone with the sleeping infant between them, the weight of unspoken. Truth. Blake stood and walked to the window, his back to Jasmine, giving them both a moment to gather courage for the conversation they needed to have. The Manhattan skyline stretched before him, the same view he looked at every day, but nothing felt the same anymore. 2 years ago, Jasmine's voice came from behind him, shaky but determined. The medical conference in Chicago, do you remember? Blake's mind raced backward. Chicago, 2 years ago. The American Medical Association's annual conference. He had been there presenting research on new fertility treatments. It had been a grueling week of presentations, networking events, and very little sleep. I remember the conference, Blake said slowly, turning to face her. But Jasmine, we barely saw each other that week. You were there for the pediatric nursing seminars. The last night, Jasmine continued, her eyes fixed on Oliver's sleeping face rather than on Blake. Thursday night. There was that reception at the hotel, the one for Columbia alumni. You had just finished your final presentation. You were exhausted. Fragments of memory began to surface in Blake's mind, like pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known was incomplete. The hotel bar. Expensive whiskey someone had bought to celebrate his successful presentation. Jasmine appearing unexpectedly, saying she had switched her flight to stay an extra day. They had talked for hours about old times, about how much they missed their friendship, about how their careers had pulled them in different directions. "We went to your room," Blake said, the memory becoming clearer, sharper. "You were upset about something. A patient you had lost that week, a little girl with leukemia." Jasmine nodded, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Emma. She was 6 years old. I had taken care of her for 2 years, and she died 3 days before the conference." I was barely holding myself together. The missing pieces. Blake remembered more now. Jasmine crying against his shoulder. Him holding her, trying to offer comfort. The whiskey making everything feel both more intense and more distant. The way grief and loneliness and years of unspoken feelings had collided in that hotel room. "We fell asleep," Blake said, his voice barely audible. "When I woke up, you were gone. I thought I had dreamed it or that you regretted it. I tried calling you for weeks after, but you never answered." "I couldn't face you," Jasmine admitted, finally meeting his eyes. "I felt like I had taken advantage of you when you were drunk and exhausted. And then when I found out I was pregnant 6 weeks later, I was terrified." Blake moved back to the chair beside her bed, his mind reeling. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I convinced myself it couldn't be yours," Jasmine said, her voice breaking. "We only had one night, and I had been seeing someone else casually around that same time. A doctor at my hospital. It seemed more logical that the baby was his. So I convinced myself that's what happened." "And when did you realize the truth?" Jasmine looked down at Oliver, stroking his soft cheek with one finger. "About a month ago. I was looking through old photos on my phone and found one of us from medical school. You were making that ridiculous face you always made when you were trying to cheer me up. And I saw your eyes, Blake. Those amber eyes that almost nobody else has. And I knew." Blake reached out slowly, carefully, and touched Oliver's tiny hand. The baby's fingers instinctively wrapped around his finger, the grip surprisingly strong. "He has my grandmother's eyes," Blake whispered. "She died when I was 10, but I remember her eyes so clearly. My mother used to say they were like drops of honey in sunlight." "I'm so sorry," Jasmine sobbed. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry I let you think I didn't want to talk to you after Chicago. I was just so scared and confused." A new reality. Blake felt tears burning in his own eyes as he looked at this tiny human, this perfect little being who shared his DNA, who had his grandmother's eyes and his mother's nose, and probably 100 other traits Blake would discover in the years to come. "Does he have the birthmark?" Blake asked suddenly. Jasmine looked confused. "What birthmark?" "On the left shoulder blade, a small mark shaped like a crescent moon. It's a Morrison family trait. My father had it, I have it, my brother has it." Carefully, Jasmine adjusted Oliver's blanket and opened his onesie. There on his tiny left shoulder blade was a small reddish-brown mark in the unmistakable shape of a crescent moon. Blake let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "That's my son. That's my son." "I know," Jasmine whispered. "I'm so sorry I kept this from you, even for just a month. I was trying to figure out how to tell you. That's why I called you that night. Not just because I needed a doctor, but because you deserved to be there when he was born. You deserved to meet your son." Blake carefully gathered both Jasmine and Oliver into his arms, holding them as tears streamed down his face. All the success, all the money, all the professional achievements that had defined his life suddenly seemed insignificant compared to this moment. "We have a son," he said, wonder and disbelief and joy mixing in his voice. "We have a son, Jasmine." She nodded against his shoulder, crying and laughing at the same time. "We have a son." As Oliver stirred and began to fuss, Blake gently lifted him from Jasmine's arms. Cradling his son, for the first time with full knowledge of their connection. The baby's amber eyes opened again, seeming to focus on Blake's face. "Hello, Oliver," Blake whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your dad, and I'm never going to let you go." The hours after the morning sun climbed higher over Manhattan as Blake sat in the armchair beside Jasmine's bed, Oliver sleeping peacefully in his arms. He had been holding his son for 3 hours straight, unable to put him down, afraid that if he did, this moment might dissolve like a dream. Rebecca had checked on them twice, bringing water and breakfast that neither Blake nor Jasmine had touched. "We need to figure out what happens next," Jasmine said softly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled over them. She had managed a few hours of sleep, her body recovering from labor, but her eyes were alert now. Watching Blake with a mixture of hope and anxiety, Blake looked up from Oliver's face. Reluctant to enter into practical discussions when all he wanted was to exist in this bubble of new fatherhood. But Jasmine was right. They had decisions to make, conversations to have, a future to plan. First things first, Blake said, keeping his voice gentle so as not to wake Oliver. The birth certificate. He needs my name on there. Oliver James Morrison Reed. If you're okay with that? Jasmine's eyes filled with tears again. You want to use your name? Blake, I know this is overwhelming. You don't have to commit to anything right now. Take time to process this. Process what? Blake asked, genuine confusion in his voice. That I have a son? That the woman I've cared about since medical school gave birth to our child? Jasmine, I spent the last 3 years of my life building a fertility clinic, helping other people have families. Do you really think I'm going to walk away from my own son? But your life, Jasmine protested, gesturing vaguely toward the window in the city beyond. Your practice, your reputation. A secret baby with a pediatric nurse from Queens isn't exactly going to play well with your Upper East Side clientele. Blake felt a flash of anger, though he knew it wasn't directed at Jasmine. It was directed at the world that made her think his professional success mattered more than his child. Anyone who has a problem with my son can find a different doctor. Oliver is my priority now. You both are. Difficult conversations. Jasmine shifted in the bed, wincing slightly from the soreness of delivery. Blake, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to be a father. I didn't call you that night expecting this outcome. I can raise Oliver on my own if needed. Stop, Blake said firmly. Stop giving me an out that I don't want. Yes, this is unexpected. Yes, it's going to complicate both our lives. But Jasmine, look at him. Blake angled Oliver so Jasmine could see their son's peaceful, sleeping face. How could I ever walk away from this? Because it's hard, Jasmine said, her voice breaking. Being a parent is hard. Blake, it's not the sanitized version you see in your clinic with grateful couples and professional photographers. It's 2 a.m. feedings and diaper explosions and endless worry. It's giving up sleep and social life and sometimes your sense of self. And that's just the first year. Blake listened, recognizing the fear beneath her words. She'd been preparing to do this alone, had already resigned herself to single parenthood. And now, she was protecting herself from disappointment by pushing him away. I know it's hard, Blake said quietly. My brother has 3 kids. I've watched him and his wife navigate parenthood. It's exhausting and messy, and nothing goes according to plan. But it's also real, Jasmine. More real than anything I've been doing for the past 5 years. What do you mean? Blake looked back at Oliver, choosing his words carefully. Do you know what my life has been like since we graduated? I wake up at 5 a.m. in a penthouse apartment that feels like a hotel. I go to my clinic where I help wealthy couples have babies they'll hand off to nannies. I attend charity galas where people donate money just to be seen donating money. I date women who care more about being seen with a successful doctor than actually knowing who I am. He paused, swallowing hard. I've been successful, Jasmine. Incredibly successful by every metric society uses to measure such things. But I've been empty. And I didn't even realize how empty until I walked into your apartment last night and remembered what it felt. Like to care about someone beyond a professional relationship. The weight of the past. Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, absorbing his words. That night in Chicago, she finally said, Why didn't you try harder to reach me after? I ignored your calls, but you could have shown up at my hospital, sent letters, something. Blake felt shame wash over him. Because I convinced myself you regretted it. That I had ruined our friendship by crossing a line we shouldn't have crossed. It was easier to throw myself into work than to face possible rejection from the one person whose opinion actually mattered to me. I never regretted that night, Jasmine said softly. It was the only real thing that happened to me during that awful week. But I was grieving Emma and processing the pregnancy. I convinced myself that you were better off without the complication of me in your life. You were building this empire, and I was just a pediatric nurse who couldn't even save a 6-year-old from cancer. Jasmine, you can't think that way, I know, she interrupted. My therapist has been very clear about my tendency to diminish my own worth. But knowing it intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two different things. Oliver stirred in Blake's arms, making small mewling sounds. Blake instinctively began to rock him gently, the motion coming naturally despite his lack of experience. You're good at that, Jasmine observed, a small smile touching her lips. Beginner's luck, Blake replied. But he felt a surge of pride at her words, planning a future over the next hour. They began to sketch out the practical realities of their new situation. Blake insisted that Jasmine and Oliver move into his penthouse, at least temporarily, so he could help with nighttime feedings and be present for Oliver's first weeks of life. I can't just move into your place, Jasmine protested. What will your neighbors think? You're a doorman? I don't care what they think, Blake replied. But if it makes you more comfortable, we can say, you're my girlfriend. Which isn't entirely untrue, given that we have a child together. Jasmine laughed despite herself. Blake, we're not dating. We're two old friends who slept together once and produced a baby. That doesn't make us a couple. Then what does it make us? Blake challenged. Co-parents, Jasmine said. Partners in raising Oliver. Friends who share a child? Blake nodded slowly, though something in his chest tightened at her words. He wanted to be more than co-parents, wanted to explore what they could be together. But he recognized that now wasn't the time to push. They had a lifetime ahead of them to figure out their relationship. Okay, he agreed. Co-parents and friends. But I'm still insisting you stay with me for at least the first few months. You'll have your own room, complete privacy, and help whenever you need it. Plus, my apartment has better security than your building, and Oliver deserves to be safe. Jasmine considered this, clearly torn between her fierce independence and the practical advantages Blake was offering. 3 months, she finally conceded. We'll try living together for 3 months and see how it goes. But Blake, if at any point you feel overwhelmed or regretful, you have to promise to tell me. No martyring yourself for our sake, deal, Blake agreed. And the same goes for you. If I'm hovering too much or making you feel uncomfortable, you tell me immediately. Small beginnings. Oliver woke fully then, his tiny face scrunching up as he prepared to cry. Blake felt a moment of panic, unsure what to do. But Jasmine guided him through the process of checking the diaper and then bringing the baby to her for feeding. As Blake watched Jasmine nurse their son, he was struck by the intimacy of the moment. This was his family, imperfect and unexpected and completely unplanned, but his nonetheless.
Us.
I want to be at every appointment, Blake said suddenly. Every pediatrician visit, every milestone, everything. I know I can't make up for missing the pregnancy, but I don't want to miss anything else. Jasmine looked up at him, and for the first time since Oliver's birth, Blake saw hope in her eyes. You really mean that, don't you? This isn't just guilt or obligation talking. Really mean it, Blake confirmed. Jasmine, I know we have a lot to figure out. I know this isn't the conventional way to start a family. But when I look at Oliver, when I look at you, I see the thing I've been missing in my life without even knowing it was missing. What's that? Purpose, Blake said simply. Real purpose, not the manufactured kind that comes from professional success. Oliver gives me a reason to be better, to do better. You both do. Jasmine finished nursing and handed Oliver to Blake for burping, showing him how to support the baby's head and pat his back gently. When Oliver let out a loud burp that seemed impossibly large for such a tiny person, they both laughed. Welcome to parenthood, Jasmine said, grinning. Where bodily functions become causes for celebration. I think I'm going to like it, Blake replied, settling Oliver against his shoulder as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows of the birthing suite. Blake made a mental list of everything he needed to do. Call his mother and tell her she had a grandson. Convert his spare bedroom into a nursery. Order every baby item Jasmine mentioned they would need. Clear his schedule for the next 2 weeks so he could be present for every moment. But more than any of that, he needed to prove to Jasmine that he was serious about being a father, about being a partner in raising their son. Words were easy, but actions would show his true commitment. "Thank you," Jasmine said softly, breaking into his thoughts. "For what?" "For not running. For being here. For being you." Blake looked at his son, then at Jasmine, and felt a peace he had never experienced in all his years of professional success. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." New beginnings that evening. As Blake filled out Oliver's birth certificate with both their names listed as parents, he realized that his life had fundamentally changed in the span of 12 hours. The man who had walked into his office the previous night was gone, replaced by someone with different priorities, different dreams, different definitions of success. Oliver James Morrison Reed would grow up knowing both his parents loved him. He would grow up in a home where medicine was respected, but family came first. He would grow up understanding that the best things in life were often the unplanned ones, the surprises that derailed carefully laid plans and created something better than could ever have been anticipated. As Blake signed his name on the birth certificate, making his fatherhood official, he looked at Jasmine and smiled. They had a long journey ahead of them, full of challenges and adjustments, and probably more than a few arguments about the best way to raise their son, but they would face it together. These two old friends who had created a new life, and in doing so, had been given a chance to create new lives for themselves as well. "Ready to go home?" Blake asked as the hospital released them the next morning. Jasmine, holding Oliver in a car seat Blake had purchased overnight, nodded. "Ready as I'll ever be." And as they walked out of the clinic into the bright New York morning, a newly formed family taking its first steps together, Blake knew that everything that came before this moment had simply been preparation for the life that was truly about to begin.